Okay, so as you can see, I've started adding a little bit of very light lines, and I've looked really carefully at the colors in the petals. They're just very, very faint little shadows in the white petals. So I'm using a combination of this kind of aqua green and this bluish purple for the shadows directly in the petals themselves, and then and I'm pretty much done with that. So now what I'm going to do is add a little bit of detail on the inside of these, the very center. Now I'm going to use a combination of this kind of purpley red and kind of a brighter red for the little buds that have much more pinkish hues to them. Some of these are much darker than others, so I'm going to press harder and put more pigment down from the pencil. Okay, so I have the flowers done. I'm actually going to work on the leaves separately. So I'm going to do the flowers first, and then I'll be able to see exactly where I want all the shadows for the leaves. So I'm using a small round brush because I want more control over the amount of water that I add. And I'm going to use a paper towel to kind of dry off the ferrule, which is this little metal part. One of the most frustrating things is when you're trying to do something detailed and you have a big drop of water on the ferrule, and it all of a sudden just blops onto your painting. So you want a nice loaded brush with water, but not one that has that that kind of booby trap on the ferrule that is going to drop in. So I actually missed putting a little bit of pencil right here under this curl of the petal. So once it's dry, I'll go back and add that. I don't want to add it now, otherwise it'll be a completely different look, and it won't match the delicate textures of the rest and colors of the rest of the petal. But I needed a little bit of pencil right under that curl, just like I have on that petal and this petal. But for artists who like to have a little bit more control over the effects that they're creating and are a little bit more familiar with drawing, watercolor pencils are a wonderful option. And for those who do like to paint, they're a wonderful option as well. Okay, so I finished adding the colored or the watercolor pencils to the different leaves, and then added a few more layers to the interior. I noticed that there wasn't quite enough contrast between the background and the foreground leaves, so I added some more watercolor pencils to different areas, kind of creating a little bit of leaf forms in the background, kind of blurred. And now we're going to enjoy the magic of adding water to these leaves. And let's see, I'm going to use, in some places I'll use the longer round brush, which, especially for the background, will give it a little bit more of a blurred, uncontrolled feel. And then I'm going to use the short one for a little bit more control. Actually, I'm going to use the medium one, so it isn't quite as short as this one. You see that? And it's also not quite as long as that one. So I changed my mind there. You can also get the water off the ferrule by kind of tapping it on the side of the cup. Notice that I don't just add the water randomly, but I'm adding it to certain areas and focusing on that area one section at a time. This enables you to control the shading a little bit. Much more than you could if you just, like took your brush and brushed it back and forth across the whole surface. You're also controlling the way the water works with the pigment that you've put on the paper by how much water you put on. And that's why, if you're wanting a little bit more control, don't have a bunch of water stored on the ferrule, because it can just drop onto your paper unexpectedly. But there are times when that's kind of fun. Also, don't feel like you have to get everything right on the first layer. You can always add more watercolor pencil and add more water. Okay, so a couple of things that I've added. I've added a stem for this because I realized I didn't draw that in. So I just want to show you how you can add something. This is obviously much darker than the rest, so once it dries, I will add some white to that. I've also added a little bit of pigment to the branch. It has some kind of frosty areas, so I'm not going to fill it in completely. And I might add some white to that as well, just to kind of add that kind of milkiness on top of the color. Okay, now when you're looking at this, a couple of things stand out. First of all is a lack of contrast in a few areas. I'm looking at this right here. We don't really have a distinct difference, enough of a difference, I guess I should say, to make this flower kind of come forward like it does back here and over here. So I'm going to add a little bit more color, and let's see, I don't want a super dark color, but I'm going to add a little bit of this, and we're going to kind of create like little circles. That is a nice way of adding gentle shading without having real distinct lines. Okay, and then I'm going to add a little bit of a darker green on top of that. This one will do. I'm going to go sparingly on this because it's quite a bit darker. Don't want to go overboard. And let's see if there are any other areas. Maybe right in here. Actually, I shouldn't be using that real dark green. Up in here needs a little more contrast as well. And then when you add contrast, you've got to kind of blend that out into the area surrounding it so that it doesn't look like it's just a separate shape. I also want to blend this shadow out a little bit more. And add a little bit more shadows under there. And let's see, a little bit there. And I kind of want this to be quite a bit darker. I think it's on the right track, but needs just a little bit of a boost. Okay, and then we'll add a little bit more shadow. Make some of these lines a little bit more distinct. Separating some of the petals a little bit more. Okay, now when you add these, you can either just leave it dry. I mean, that's the beauty of watercolor pencils. You can use them, add water to them, or it's perfectly fine to leave it as it is. And I'll just do a couple of areas, if I can find my paintbrush. I'm using, here we go. And so I'll show you kind of the difference. Okay, so you see these lines get kind of softened a little bit and blended out. See, some other areas I might add a little bit of water to. You know what, between these two areas, now that I'm looking at it, needs to be a little bit more defined as well. So I'm going to Just add a little bit shading back there. Maybe even a little bit of this color. Okay, so that is pretty much the you know, the finished state. I might come back after a little while and, you know, have had some time to not have this imprinted in my mind so I can get a fresh look. And I'm also going to add just a little bit of white to this now that I'm remembering. And I'm not going to add water to that because that'll just mute it. And a little bit of white there. Any areas in here that you want to kind of blend out, make a little bit lighter, you can do that as well. Alright, so now it is done.